Hi, Dave Burns here. This week's video is a beginner's guide to looping. Hi, Dave Burns here. This week's video is a beginner's guide to looping. Hi, Dave Burns here. This week's video is a beginner's guide to looping. Hello and welcome to this week's video diary. Now just before I start, the usual spiel at the beginning. Massive thank you to all of the patrons over at patreon.com/davidburns for your support and funding for the channel. If you'd like to be a subscriber, then that would be awesome. Tiers start at just £1 a month and it all adds up to help keep the wolf from the door whilst I'm playing fewer gigs as Scotland still has high COVID case numbers. Thank you as well to everyone who has liked the videos on YouTube and subscribed there. Click the little bell icon to get notifications of when I'm putting new videos up. And thank you to everyone who has shared these videos on social media. This week's video is an introduction to loop pedals. Last week I did a Q&A Ask Me Anything session on this channel, and this is going to be a semi-regular thing. So if you've got any more questions you would like to ask, then please do leave them in the comments. Now, one that came in from my friend Jude, I thought that warranted a full episode on its own. She said, I'd be interested in learning more about loop effects pedals. Confidence in performing with my guitar is going up, but I'd love to be able to use a looper and add some harmonies. Do you have any advice or recommendations? Now, I do have a loop pedal. This is my looper. This is the Boss RC3. It's currently resident on my home practice board, but it's not something that I've made a great deal of use of beyond just laying out a basic rhythm chord sequence to practice over. So I thought I'd best take a little bit of time to get to know my pedal a little bit better before trying to answer Jude's question. So yes, this is the one that I've been using. This is the Boss RC3. It's one of a whole range of loop pedals that Boss make, and this is one at the simpler end of their range, one of the less expensive ones. So it's one of the more commonly used ones out there. This video is going to be a fairly basic beginner's guide, so if you're already familiar with the massive multi-loop boards that the likes of Ed Sheeran use, then you're probably not going to learn anything new here. But if you've never used a looper before, or like me, you've got one but you haven't made a lot of use of it, hopefully this video will be helpful. So let's start right at the very beginning with what a loop pedal does. When you plug one into your rig and hit the switch, it will record everything that you play from that moment on. When you hit the switch again, it will start to play back what it's just recorded, and that will repeat that loop over and over again. And you can then play a second part over what's been recorded, or even record more, add multiple layers of sound and sound over the top of that. Now, this isn't a particularly new idea. Players like Les Paul or the BBC Radiophonic Workshop musicians like D. Derbyshire were doing things like this back in the 50s and 60s. But the equipment to do it back then used loops of magnetic tapes, so the machines were often huge, cumbersome things that were far too fragile to take out on the road to use for gigging. The technique that was developed then, that's the basis for all tape delay, which is a fantastic sound. And all modern delay and echo units are just using more modern practical portable technologies to produce the same sort of effect of playing back a sound that you've just recorded. Now, the drawback for using a delay pedal for loops is that they generally only have a few seconds of record time, not long enough to fit an entire chord sequence or musical phrase. Now you can fit a digital recording device that can store hours of audio into a standard size pedal. Looping has really come into its own as a creative tool for songwriting. And the first time that I remember seeing one used, and I'm sure this is going to be the same for a lot of people out there, was Katie Tunstall's performance of Black Horse and the Cherry Tree on Later with Jules Holland. It's a brilliant demonstration of what you can do with a looper. The clip's on YouTube, go and look it up, it's brilliant. Okay, so now let's have a look at how I've got this looper set up on my board and how I tend to use it. So I'm going to start just by looping guitars, and then later in the video we'll come on to adding vocal parts. Now, as with all pedals, the first thing that you're going to want to consider is where in the signal chain to put it. I always have the looper as the very last thing on my board. That's because it will only record what goes into it. That seems a very obvious thing to say, but it's worth noting. If you have the looper at the start of your chain, let's say you start off playing a clean rhythm guitar part, then you kick on a fuzz to record a riff. Then if your fuzz pedal is after the loop, it's going to add fuzz to everything that the looper is sending out. So now your clean rhythm take is blasting out distorted too. If you have the looper right at the end of the effects chain, then all the effects are on the input side. Each loop will only have the effects that you switched on at the time that you recorded them. Okay, so now that we've got the pedal in the right place, got a simple loop on the go, let's take a closer look at what this can do. Once you've got a loop down, there are two things that you can do next. You can have the looper in play mode, where it will just play back what it's recorded and you can perform a second part live over the top of it. Or you can have the looper in record mode, where it will take the first loop and add what you play on top of that loop to create a new loop, layering what you play every time the loop goes round until you switch it over to play mode or stop the loop. Record mode is the default, so that when you mark the end point of the loop, you go on to record a new layer on top of that. You can undo the last layer that you've added, which is useful to fix a mistake or to bring parts in and out of a song. There's a volume control on the pedal where you can adjust the balance of the loop volume and the live guitar sound. This is where the RC3 model can start to get a little bit complicated, as you're controlling all of these functions from the one foot switch with a combination of single taps, double taps, and press and hold for 2-second taps. Now, if you're in the middle of a song concentrating on singing the right part, playing the right guitar take, and pressing the right combination of buttons, it can be easy to get lost. So I would advise getting a little add-on to the basic RC3 unit if this is the one you're using to make life a little bit easier. This is the FS5U external foot switch. If you plug this into the jack labelled stop memory switch, then you move some of these functions over to a second switch. So this is the external foot switch. Connected up, and now you've got two different buttons to control some of the functions. So with the external switch connected, the controls are now tap the main pedal to start the loop, tap the pedal again to mark where the loop ends, and whilst the loop is playing, tap the pedal to switch between record and play modes. If you hold the pedal down for 2 seconds, this will take out the last loop that you've recorded, and if you do the same again, it'll put it back in. The external switch is now the one that you tap to stop the loop, and if you press this down for 2 seconds, this will erase the loop, letting you start over again. Okay, so now that's the basic theory on how you make loops. Now for some more practical advice on how to create good loops. Now, the first thing that a lot of players are probably going to struggle with is timing. If you're new to looping, you've got to get your timing absolutely exactly bang on, and it takes a lot of practice. If you're slightly off time when you start or stop the loop, it's going to get slightly less or more than the exact phrase that you wanted to record, and it's going to be slightly out every time it repeats. And it's going to be difficult to play along because you're not getting the exact number of beats in the bar that you're expecting, and you're going to get thrown every time you get to the repeat point. Now there's no particular shortcut or hack that will make this easier other than simply putting the practice in. You need to put the time in to develop your sense of rhythm to the point where you can nail getting the exact number of bars in the phrase that you want to repeat. There are some things that you can do to help in your practice with that though. Typically the advice would be to practice with a metronome to get used to staying with a rhythm and tempo. There are apps that you can download that will give you a metronome beat to practice with. For example, the Guitar Tuner app has a metronome included in the free version. If you find it difficult to get a feel for the rhythm with a metronome, one thing I would suggest trying is to play with a drum machine. Again, there are lots of apps and software that can do that. One I use is the drummer track in GarageBand. You can set that up to play to a specific time signature and tempo and practice keeping in time with that. There is also a drum machine built into the RC3 itself. It's fairly basic and not the greatest sounding digital drums you'll ever hear, but it is handy as a practice tool. If I get the looper again, you can turn it on by pressing the rhythm on-off switch. That's that button there. And set the tempo with the tap tempo button next to it. Hold the rhythm button down for 2 seconds and then you can choose between the built-in drum patterns with the up and down buttons. There's a couple of other tips in terms of exactly what you're playing that can make looping a little bit easier. First of all, it's helpful to start playing your rhythm guitar part for a few bars before you try and loop it. That way the strings are already ringing out when you start the loop. If you go to record right at the very moment you start playing, you might find yourself capturing a tiny bit of silence in the moment just before you hit the strings. And if you do, then that silence is going to be repeated every time the loop phrase and it's going to sound jarring. By playing a little bit of the song before you start the loop, say going round the chord sequence once before you start it, you're going to get a more natural crossover point where the loop ends and starts again. Another thing that's helpful is to play something with quite a strong accent on the one, on the beat, particularly if you're new to looping and still getting used to it. By accenting the first beat of the bar, it's easier to hear where in the loop you are when you're playing along to it. Okay, so now that we've dealt with guitar loops, the next thing you're going to want to do is add some vocals into the mix. You'll have seen people doing amazing things with backing vocals and harmony parts using a microphone and a looper, but if you've tried it yourself, particularly with a looper like the RC3, you have likely run into a few issues. The RC3 has 3 jack inputs on the right of the pedal. The top one is the connection for the external foot switch. The middle one has my guitar and pedals plugged into it, so you might imagine that you could use the bottom one to connect the vocals. Well, it's not an XLR connector for a start, that's the standard connection that microphones use. You might think that you could circumvent that by using a microphone connected to an XLR to jack lead. But if you tried that, then you'll find that the vocal part is barely audible. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Now this is going to be a slightly technical explanation, but bear with me. There are 4 signal levels that audio equipment can operate at, and the difference between them is the voltage that they output. So that's mic level, instrument level, line level and speaker level, and they are in that order increasing in voltage. Mic level is the lowest of all of them, so that's why you need to dial up so much gain when you plug your vocal mic into a mixing desk. The RC3 jack inputs are expecting a signal at the slightly higher voltage instrument level that a guitar puts out. If you connect a microphone into the jack input, then the signal is too weak to be heard compared to the signal from your guitar. So if you want to work with vocal loops with the RC3, you're going to need to amplify the microphone signal before it goes into it. The easiest way to do that is to plug the microphone into a mixing desk, turn the gain up until you've got a good signal at the desk, and then output that, because on the back of the RC3 is a line level auxiliary input. I'm using the big mixer that I have for my home studio here, but you can pick up a small 1 or 2 channel mixer that's much more portable and suitable for taking around to gigs for around 40 to 50 pounds. And then you connect the output from the mixer into the mini jack aux input on the pedal. So now you've got a microphone signal at the perfect level, and everything I've said about looping the guitar parts applies the same to looping your vocals. So let's take all that I've talked about and put that into a complete demo. I'm going to try and perform a version of Elbows One Day Like This using loops. So I'll start off by laying down a rhythm part with the looped part just after the first chord, so I don't get that pre-strum silence. A song like this is particularly well suited to working with loops, as for most of the song the chord sequence doesn't change. So you can play it once, loop it, then play that back, add some more details, and that loop will do for most of the song. Just keep adding more and more details over the top of it. Now once the loop is in place, I'll kick on an overdrive pedal to play the riff over the chords, then play an arpeggiated guitar part during the verses. I'll stop the looper for the sections between verses and for the quieter middle 8 section, and then clear the stored loop to make way for a new chord sequence that takes place in the coda, and add looped harmony vocals into that part. And then I'll post how many outtakes the video had before I got all that right. Now, like I said, the very best advice for working with loops is practice. Lots and lots of practice. And be ready to laugh it off if it all goes wrong on stage, because sometimes it will. Heavy like a loaded gun, made me behave that way, using words words I never say. I can only think it must be love. Oh, anyway, it's looking like a beautiful day. Tell me how I feel. It's silly wrong, but vivid right. Kiss me like the final meal. Yeah, kiss me like we die tonight. 'Cause holy cow, I love your eyes. Only now I see the light. Yeah, lying with you, half awake. Oh, anyway, it's looking like a beautiful day. Is chamois creased. If you think I wing tided, laugh politely at your peace. Yeah, kiss me when my lips are thin. 'Cause holy cow, I love your eyes. Only now I see the light. Yeah, lying with you, half awake, stumbling over what to say. Oh, anyway, it's looking like a beautiful day. Throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. Day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So holy cow, I love your eyes wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. Holy cow, I love your eyes. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, it'd see me right. So throw those curtains wide. One day like this here, see me right. Burst a string in the middle of it, but that's the best take I've got so far. I think that was something like the 4th or 5th take before I got it completely right. I am slightly out of practice with my looper. I haven't used it much in a while, but it's been fun to get back into playing along with it and trying out some things with it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I do hope I've answered your questions. If you've got any more questions, please do leave them in the comments. Please do like and subscribe the video. Check out Patreon, patreon.com/David Burns, and I'll see you all again for next week's video. Take care, goodbye.